blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello. Good morning. This is George Collins, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the current issue of the Wall Street Journal, dated February 27, 2026. Reading to you on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right. In national political news, I guess you would say, Hillary Clinton said she had no prior knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's wrongdoing and accused House Republicans of conducting a partisan fishing expedition as she sat Thursday for a closed-door videotape deposition in front of a GOP-led House committee. The former Secretary of State said she had no information to share about any criminal activity by the late financier or his associate Ghislaine Maxwell, and she said the committee should instead be calling President Trump to give a deposition over his past relationship with Epstein. Ain't that the truth? Quote, I do not recall ever encountering Mr. Epstein. I never flew on his plane or visited his island, his homes, or offices. I have nothing to add to that, she said, according to her prepared remarks. Obviously, I wouldn't think many women would be hanging out with Epstein or going to his island because it was primarily a quote-unquote men's club, period. She said she was called to testify, quote, in order to distract attention from Trump's actions and to cover them up despite legitimate calls for answers, she added. President Clinton's deposition comes ahead of her husband, former President Bill Clinton's testimony, which is scheduled for today. Alrighty. The testimony is taking place at a performing arts center near their home in Chappaqua, downstate New York. The extraordinary circumstances involving the Epstein case marked the first time a former First Lady and former President were speaking to a congressional committee under subpoena. The deposition was briefly paused after Representative Lauren Boebert, a Republican from Colorado, sent a photo. All right, just a second here. I gotta find the continuation of the article. Sent a photo of Clinton to MAGA influencer Benny Johnson, who then posted it on X. House rules prohibit taking photographs of closed-door proceedings. House Oversight Committee Chair Representative James Comer, Republican Kentucky, said his panel was pursuing a serious and bipartisan investigation. Comer said, quote, the American people have a lot of questions. To my knowledge, the Clintons haven't answered very many, if any, questions about their knowledge or involvement with Epstein or Maxwell, who is presently serving a 20-year sentence for helping to recruit and groom underage girls. Comer said the committee, which has been conducting its investigation since last year, was not accusing Hillary Clinton of any wrongdoing. The Clintons have said they had no personal knowledge of Epstein's criminal activities. Bill Clinton has acknowledged flying on Epstein's jet for foundation work in 2002 and 2003, but has said he never visited Epstein's island. Democrats, speaking to reporters more than 2 hours into the deposition, said the interview had revealed no new information and that Clinton was fully cooperating. They said committee rules barred them from discussing specifics of the deposition and that they wanted the transcript released as soon as possible. They also wanted to have media in the room for Bill Clinton's deposition on Friday. Representative Robert Garcia of California, the top Democrat on the committee, said Clinton did not invoke her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He and other Democrats said it was unacceptable that Boebert released the photo. Representative Wesley Bell, a Democrat from Missouri, a former prosecutor, said, "I've been involved in leading investigations of serious offenses, and this ain't it." Democrats also pushed for Trump and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick to testify. Lutnick earlier this month said he visited Epstein's private island in 2012 with his wife and children, years after Lutnick said he'd cut off ties with him. Lutnick said he has done, quote, "absolutely nothing wrong in any possible regard." The reality is we're talking to the wrong person today, said Representative Suhas Subrabneham, quote, Democrat, Virginia. "Let's talk to Secretary Lutnick instead," close quote. For Hillary Clinton, who served as Secretary of State in the Obama administration and as a U.S. Senator representing New York, the deposition reprises memories of her contentious marathon in the 2015 hearing before Congress over the Benghazi attack in Libya. She has endured scandals centered around her husband's political career and presidency, including investigations into the Whitewater land deal and his affair with Monica Lewinsky. Epstein and Trump spent time together in the 1990s and early 2000s. Trump has said his friendship with Epstein ended before Epstein pled guilty to procuring a minor for prostitution in 2008. When Epstein was arrested again in 2019, Trump said he had not talked to Epstein for 15 years. The president said recently he has been, quote, "totally exonerated," close quote, of any wrongdoing in connection with Epstein. The committee's investigation is focused on the federal government's handling of Epstein, the financier who died in jail in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Lawmakers have said that they are examining prosecutorial decisions across multiple administrations, including the 2008 non-prosecution agreement that Epstein reached with federal prosecutors in Florida, which was a deal that later drew bipartisan criticism. Files released by the Justice Department beginning in December, including photographs of Bill Clinton and references to his past interactions with Epstein. Being mentioned in the files is not an indication of wrongdoing. A review of the files by the Wall Street Journal did not find correspondence with Hillary Clinton, although her name appears in news clippings in Epstein's his email inbox. Maxwell attended the 2010 wedding of Chelsea Clinton, the Clinton's daughter, as a guest of computer entrepreneur Ted Waite. Bill Clinton wrote in his 2024 memoir entitled Citizen that he had no inkling of Epstein's crimes at that time. Clinton said, "Epstein hurt a lot of people, but I know nothing about it." The battle over the Clintons' testimony has scrambled partisan lines. Some Democrats voted to advance contempt proceedings against both Clintons, though many said they felt Hillary Clinton was getting dragged into the investigation unfairly. Clinton allies have cast the investigation as politically motivated, and I think that is the end of the article. So let's drop that, giving you your daily dose of the Epstein matter. Here's an interesting headline. Americans are leaving the United States in record numbers. More citizens are replanting overseas, enabled by America's enviable salaries. In its 250th year, is America, the land of immigration, becoming a country of emigration? Last year, the U.S. experienced something that hasn't definitively occurred since the Great Depression. In other words, more people are moving out of our country than moving in. The Trump administration has hailed the exodus, negative net migration, as the fulfillment of its promise to ramp up deportations and restrict new visas. Beneath the stormy optics of that immigration crackdown, however, lies a less noticed reversal. America's own citizens are leaving in record numbers and replanting themselves and their families in lands that they find more affordable and safe. Since the Eisenhower administration, the U.S. hasn't collected comprehensive statistics on the number of citizens leaving. Yet, data on residence permits and foreign home purchases, student enrollments, and other metrics from more than 50 countries show that Americans are voting with their feet to an unprecedented degree. A million strong, let me start again, a millions-strong diaspora is studying, telecommuting, and retiring overseas. The new American dream for some of its citizens is to no longer live there. Sad commentary. In the cobblestone streets of Lisbon, so many Americans are snapping up apartments that the newest arrivals complain they mostly hear their own language, not Portuguese. All right, let me continue with this. This is kind of an interesting thing. 1 of every 15 residents in Dublin's trendy Grand Canal Dock district was born in the U.S., according to realtors, higher than the percentage of Americans born in Ireland during the 19th century influx following the potato famine. In Bali, in Colombia, and Thailand, the strains of housing American remote workers paid in dollars have inspired locals to mount protests against a wave of gentrification. More than 100,000 young students are enrolled abroad for a more affordable university degree. In nursing homes, mushrooming across the Mexican border, elderly Americans are turning up for low-cost care. On a conference call last month hosted by Expatsy, a relocation company, almost 400 Americans signed up to learn how to move to Albania. The former Stalinist state offers a special visa that allows U.S. citizens to live and work there with no tax on foreign income for a year and no questions asked. Quote, previously, the Americans leaving were super adventurous and well-credentialed, said Expatsy founder Jen Barnett, a 54-year-old Alabama native who moved to Yucatan, Mexico in 2024. Now, they're ordinary people like me. Some commentators have labeled this wave of American emigrants the, quote, Donald Dash, close quote, since numbers have spiked under President Trump's second term. But the phenomenon has been building for years, fed by the rise of remote work, mounting living costs, and an appetite for foreign lifestyles that feel within reach, especially in Europe. A White House spokesman said the U.S. economy is far outpacing other developed nations, and the Trump administration policies were deporting hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants and attracting, quote, countless ultra-high net worth foreigners, close quote, who are, quote, shelling out $1 million for a gold card to come settle in the United States. Yeah, take that with a grain of salt. Now, let's shift gears here to television. And there is a television show starring Kevin Kline and Laura Linney, two of my favorite actors, in a show entitled American Classic, created by two guys, Michael Hoffman and Bob Martin. So, headline, Kevin Kline comes home, hilariously. On several occasions during the rollicking American Classic show, we see a photo of the much younger Richard Bean, played by Kevin Kline, cradling Yorick's skull during his celebrated performance as Hamlet. The photo actually is of Kevin Kline in his celebrated performance as Hamlet, and this is cute. But in portraying the endearingly insufferable Richard, Mr. Kline is also channeling John Barrymore's volcanic Oscar Jaffe in the classic screwball, quote, 20th century, entitled 20th Century, a comedy that demonstrated the versatility of John Barrymore, one of the more famous American Hamlets. Mr. Kline, by the way, won a Tony for his 1978 Broadway production of On the 20th Century, which I think was a train. Actors and Hamlets and comedy intersect in this new show, American Classic. I may have heard someone say Booth, quote unquote Booth, B-O-O-T-H. I'm not sure what that reference is all about. All of which would be merely clever if the 8-episode classic were not, in addition to being the funniest series of recent memory, so devoted to the concepts of tradition and continuity in the theater. Richard, played by Richard Kline, has enjoyed a brilliant Broadway career, attacked a critic who didn't like his King Lear performance, and has to retreat to his small town of Millersburg, Pennsylvania, to try to repair his life and to bury his mother. If the premise suggests, quote, waiting for Guffman, close quote, a reference I don't understand, so does the message that theater can be everywhere. In what book of rules, someone asks in a famous movie entitled All About Eve, does it say that the theater exists only within some ugly buildings crowded into 1 square mile of New York City? Millersburg, Pennsylvania will be a hotbed of drama, and not all of it on the stage, where Richard will direct his mother's funeral with the understatement of C.B. DeMille, although he eventually agrees to lose the fog machine and thus spake Zarathustra. Some of these references, I have to confess, are beyond me, so I'll try to spare you as many of these as I can. In our alleged golden age of television, comedy has been Cordelia, who was one of King Lear's daughters, the disenfranchised child of a grim medium. There are amusing moments in murder mysteries and gangster sagas. Sometimes one needs a break. But the objective of this television show, entitled American Classic, is pure humor built on and bolstered by the more poignant aspects of the story. Richard, played by Kevin Kline, for all his fame, is lonely, as is evidenced by his solo drinking at his own opening night party. The woman at the bar with whom he seems to click, whose name is Polly, played by the magnificent Jessica Hecht, turns out to be his ex-wife. His former girlfriend, named Christian, played by Laura Linney, with whom he used to live and act in Manhattan, is now married to his brother, John. Together, they run the family's faltering Millersburg Festival Theater as a combination restaurant and fourth run rep house, doing such shows as Forever Plaid and Nonsense. Christian says those two shows, quote, saved our ass, when Richard implies that his cherished theater is being defiled. Well, it sounds interesting, but I think I'll stop. Quick story here, or at least I will synopsize it for you, or summarize it. Lead headline, lead article in the Wall Street Journal today: mortgage rates fall below 6%. Average 5.9% level is the lowest in over 3 years, and it crosses key threshold for a battered market. Mortgage rates fell below 6% this week for the first time in more than 3 years, which is welcome news for waves of young and old house hunters heading into the busy spring home buying season. The average rate for a 30-year fixed mortgage this week was 5.9%, the lowest level since September of 2022, and a slight decline from last week. Mortgage rates briefly topped 7% in January last year, but they've fallen steadily over the past several months. Cooling inflation and economic uncertainty have helped bring them down, and the Federal Reserve's 3 interest rate cuts in the second half of 2025 added to the momentum. All right, well, that's interesting. Well, that's good for, people in their 30s and, the millennials. Big picture on the front page, under which is under a headline, Chicago mourns civil rights leader Jackson. The body of the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who died last week, was borne Thursday into the Chicago headquarters of his Rainbow Push Coalition to lie in repose. Memorials are planned later in Washington and South Carolina, where he was born. Trump, of course, did not allow flags to be flied at half-mast. Let's see. Let's move on. Here's a kind of a surprising article. Headline, Americans are dying younger by heart attack. The article begins, the last thing someone in their 30s or 40s should worry about is dying of a heart attack, but new research shows that more are. The proportion of adults ages 18 to 54 who died in a hospital of a severe first heart attack rose 57% between 2011 and 2022, according to a study published Thursday in the Journal of the American Heart Association. And let me just pause for a moment here to wet my whistle. And to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, getting back to this article about Americans are dying younger by heart attack, which, sorry to read such a depressing article to you, but the news is the news. Most of those who died were men, but women died at higher rates than men. Not sure I can follow that. Most of those who died were men, but women died at higher rates. Okay. The study offers the latest evidence of worsening health among younger U.S. adults, including deaths from conditions traditionally tied to aging, such as heart disease and cancer. Poorer health among younger adults is one reason heart disease remains the leading cause of death in the U.S., despite decades of medical advances that have saved millions of lives from heart attacks and other life-threatening cardiac events. The increase among 18 to 54-year-olds is especially concerning because mortality from heart attacks has generally been declining, said Dr. Mohan Satish, who is a clinical cardiovascular disease fellow at New York Presbyterian Cornell Medical Center, who was the lead author of the study. At least 3/4, or 75%, of heart attacks among young and middle-aged adults are first-time heart attacks, he said. Risk factors driving the increase include diabetes, chronic kidney disease, and drug use, the study found. Low income could also play a role if a person can't afford to get treatment, said Satish. A higher percentage of women than men had diabetes, obesity, and chronic kidney disease and were of low income, the study found. The findings add to a growing body of evidence that women are facing serious heart risks. A report published this week in a journal entitled Circulation, which is another American Heart Association journal, projected 59% of adult women will have hypertension by 2050, up from 49% in 2020. The latest study analyzed medical records of 1 million adults under 55 hospitalized with their first heart attack. It found that the death rate increased among those who had severe heart attacks, which is when a blood vessel that feeds the heart is completely blocked. All right, well, that's interesting. Pardon me for a second here. All right, headline, Mayor and New York City Police spar over snowball fight. There was a snowball fight on Monday at Washington Square Park in New York City. A snowball fight has sparked a feud between New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani and the New York City Police Department. Mamdani, who is a Democrat socialist, already had a frosty relationship with the police over past comments he's made about the NYPD, but it grew chillier this week after he played down officers being pelted with snow and ice during an organized snowball fight in Manhattan's Washington Square Park. The incident took on an even more serious tenor on Thursday when police said they arrested a 27-year-old man for assaulting officers with snowballs. Seems a little far-fetched, but let's read on. The officers were targeted when they responded to a mass gathering of snowball throwers after Monday's blizzard subsided. As some of you may know, New York City got 2 feet of snow, I think, on Monday. Some participants took shots at the officers even as they tried to take cover. 2 officers were treated for lacerations from a snowball, according to city officials. Video of the incident circulated on social media, prompting outrage from police unions who called the pelting a criminal assault. Oh, please. Mamdani has said he doesn't see the incident as a crime. He said, I can just tell you from the video I saw, it looked like kids at a snowball fight, he said Tuesday. A mayoral spokeswoman said after the NYPD announced the arrest, said that Mamdani was sticking to his initial view. The spokesman said, quote, as the mayor has said, police officers deserve to be treated with respect. The videos he saw showed a snowball fight that got out of hand. He does not believe this situation rises to the level of criminal charges. Close quote. Mamdani's characterization of the incidents is at odds with that of NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch, who condemned the snowball fight incident. She said, I want to be very clear, the behavior depicted is disgraceful and it is criminal, she said. Over several days, Mamdani has faced a flurry of criticism from police unions. It reached a crescendo after Thursday's arrest. Quote, shockingly enough, the person arrested for assaulting police officers is not, capital letters, not a kid, quote unquote, Mr. New York City Mayor, this is from the New York City Detectives Endowment Association in a social media post. Mamdani is less than 2 months into his job, but he has had a tough start. He has already contended with 2 major snowstorms and a cold snap in which 19 people died from exposure. He also faces the challenge of closing a budget deficit for the upcoming fiscal year. A conflict with the police presents a tough political test for Mamdani. During the mayoral campaign, he was questioned over past comments he had made on social media about defunding the NYPD. He said those comments were out of step with his views on policing today. To help reassure the city's police, Mamdani kept Tisch as commissioner. She also had served under his predecessor and was a longtime civil servant, well respected by police and by officers and police brass. And there's a picture showing the snowball fight at Washington Square Park in New York City. I don't know. Seems like much ado over nothing, but whatever. Let me Pause to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Alrighty. Bear with me here, good people. Headline, U.S. News. Judge declines to halt construction on the White House ballroom. So work continued this week on the ballroom, which will be a 90,000 square foot structure added to the side of the White House. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. on Thursday declined to block construction of President Trump's planned White House ballroom. Trump cheered the decision from Judge Richard Leon, which denied a request from the National Trust for Historic Preservation for an order to halt work on the 90,000 square foot structure while the legal challenge proceeded. Leon wrote that both sides in the legal fight, the government and the preservationists, initially had focused on Trump's constitutional authority to tear down the East Wing and build the new structure. However, the preservationists didn't bring the proper claim to test under existing law whether Trump could do this construction project without the blessing of Congress and with private funds. If the lawsuit were amended to address that, Leon said he would consider the merits of the novel and weighty issues that were raised. Trump shocked Washington by ordering the East Wing be knocked down last October, unbelievable, to make way for the ballroom. While estimates of the project's cost and size have shifted, Trump most recently said it would cost around $400 million and hold 1,000 people. The structure, to be paid for by private donors, would include a lower level with offices for the First Lady and a movie theater and a commercial kitchen. The National Trust for Historic Preservation filed its lawsuit in December, arguing that Trump failed to properly assess the project's environmental impact or to get Congress's approval before moving ahead. In response, the Trump administration said it found no environmental study was necessary because there would be no significant impact. The preservationists called the assessment inadequate. The government wrote in a filing that it would be unfair to stop construction over, quote, a nonprofit's worries that she will be offended by the president's architectural choices if she cranes her neck on periodic strolls by the White House. The administration warned that stopping work now would pose national security threats and leave an unsightly hole in the ground indefinitely. All right. All right, going back to Chicago and Jesse Jackson, a line of mourners streamed through a Chicago auditorium on Thursday to pay final respects to the Reverend Jesse Jackson as cross-country memorial services began in the city that the late civil rights leader called home. The protege of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and a two-time presidential candidate will lie in repose for 2 days before events in Washington, D.C. and South Carolina, where he was born. Family members wiped away tears as the casket was brought into the stately brick building. Flowers lined the sidewalks where people waiting to enter watched a large screen playing excerpts of Jackson's speeches. Inside, Jackson's children, as well as Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson and the Reverend Al Sharpton, were among those who stood by the open casket to shake hands and hug those coming to view the body of Jackson dressed in a suit, blue shirt, and tie. Sharpton said, "The challenge for us is that we've got to make sure that all he lived for was not in vain." Jackson died last week at age 84 after battling a rare neurologic disorder. International news: Canada seeks U.S. trade talks. The U.S.-led review of the current trilateral North American Trade Pact will likely incorporate talks on a bilateral deal to ease U.S. tariffs on key industrial sectors, said the Canadian minister in charge of the country's trading relationship with Washington. Dominic LeBlanc on Thursday said he expects bilateral talks to unfold alongside a review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement known as USMCA. LeBlanc cited talks last fall between Ottawa and Washington to ease tariffs on key sectors like steel, aluminum, and automobiles, which Trump did later terminate. LeBlanc said Canada wants the U.S. to recommit to a trilateral pact with Mexico. The second the sectoral tariffs have squeezed Canadian manufacturing. LeBlanc again is, who is LeBlanc now? He's the Canadian minister in charge of the country's trade relationship with the U.S. LeBlanc said he expects to meet with U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer in coming days. Greer told the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation Tuesday that Canada will have to live with U.S. tariffs as part of a revised USMCA. I think that's a U.S.-Mexico-Canadian agreement. I'm sure, as usual, Trump will take the do it my way or the highway approach. All right. Moving on. In world news, the United States brings tough demands to the Iran talks. And discussions wrap up with no deal yet as Washington bolsters its presence in the region. The latest round of talks over Iran's nuclear program wrapped up Thursday without a deal, and both sides still far apart on key issues, as the U.S. raised the pressure by presenting tough demands and sending more jets and more warships to the region. I thought Trump was going to keep us out of foreign entanglements like this. Well, apparently not true. What a shock. In talks that went into the evening, U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner said that Iran must destroy its 3 main nuclear sites and deliver all of its remaining enriched uranium to the United States. They also said any nuclear deal must last forever, not sunset the way restrictions rolled off over time under the Obama nuclear pact negotiated when President Obama was in office. Apparently, Republicans said it was too weak. President Trump pulled out of that deal in his first term and reimposed strict sanctions on Iran. Iran rejected the idea of transferring uranium stockpiles abroad. It also has objected to ending enrichment or dismantling its nuclear facilities and permanent restrictions on its program, according to Iranian state media and people familiar with the talks. The Iranian foreign minister and a U.S. official said the two sides had made progress and would likely meet again for talks. The Iranian prime minister said negotiations at the level of technical experts will continue in Vienna next week. The U.S. demands came after Trump warned in his State of the Union speech on Tuesday that Iran continues to pursue a nuclear weapon and ballistic missiles that could hit the U.S., which Iran denies. Trump has threatened to take military action if a deal isn't reached and continued to deploy combat power to the region in preparation for a strike, according to open-source information and U.S. officials. At least 24 jet fighters crossed the Atlantic Ocean from the U.S., according to flight tracking data. They are expected to join several squadrons positioned at bases across the Mideast and Europe, including Israel and Jordan. An additional Navy destroyer, the USS John Finn, joined the armada of 11 other warships already operating in the northern Arabian Sea, in the Gulf of Oman, and the Persian Gulf, one of the officials said. That includes the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, as well as 7 other destroyers and 3 combat ships. The aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford, which had been at port in Greece, began sailing in the eastern Mediterranean, where it expected to continue moving into position for possible strikes. The USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier is armed with dozens of jet fighters and electronic warfare aircraft and is traveling with several guided missile destroyers capable of launching Tomahawk cruise missiles. Iran has warned it would treat any attack, however limited, as a trigger for an all-out response. An associate professor at the University of Tennessee, Saeed Golkar, said, failing that, the U.S. will next sort out by military means what it can't resolve through diplomacy. In a sign of how stretched Trump's diplomatic team has become, Witkoff and Kushner arrived for a day trip that involved shuttling between a villa overlooking Lake Geneva for the Iran nuclear talks and a 5-star hotel for negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Iran insists on its right to enrich uranium, but is floating proposals to placate the U.S. They include reducing enrichment to as low as 1.5% from 60% currently, and pausing enrichment for a number of years, or processing it through an Arab-Iranian consortium based in Iran. The discussions are hypothetical since Iran's nuclear program was largely destroyed by a war with Israel and the U.S. Over 12 days last June. The U.S. has been pushing for zero enrichment, but its negotiating team could be open to allowing Iran to restart a nuclear reactor in Tehran that would allow for a limited amount of Iranian uranium enrichment to produce medical devices. Okay. All right, let's see here. France teaches diplomacy. All right, here is a theater review, shifting gears here to the world of entertainment. And the headline of this article says, "A Comedy of Soviet Collapse." The name of the show, the name of this play is Mother Russia, which finds dark humor in the tumultuous time after the end of the USSR, which I think was in the late 80s, early 90s. The dissolution of the Soviet Union was, at least from a distance, a moment of euphoria. But there's little joy in the lives of the young Russians we meet in the play entitled Mother Russia, which is a dark, frequently hilarious comedy at a Broadway theater in New York City. The play is set in 1992, less than a year after the collapse of the USSR. The title character, an occasional commentator, played as a gloomy babushka in a red headscarf by David Turner, foresees little hope for a glorious future. And let me just pause for a second and wet my whistle. And remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, getting back to the review of the play Mother Russia. The play is set in 1992, less than a year after the collapse of the USSR. The title character and occasional commentator, played as a gloomy babushka in a red headscarf by David Turner, foresees little hope for a glorious future. Oh, apparently it's a female role. She bitterly blames the country's woes, not unreasonably, on a series of disappointing men, although she uses an earthier term than disappointing. She adds, "Never have kids," addressing the audience. "You're only as happy as your unhappiest child, and me, I have so many. Certainly the ones we meet are tense with anxiety." When one of her children, named Evgeny, bursts into the shabby shop presided over by Dmitri, he faces the barrel of Dmitri's gun. The gun is lowered when they recognize each other as old childhood friends, albeit from different strata of Soviet society. Dmitri's mother used to clean for Evgeny's family. Evgeny's father was a powerful member of the bureaucracy. Dmitri had to give up his dream of joining the KGB when his hope that the new president, Boris Yeltsin, would be removed by the remnants of the communist regime were dashed. It was a bad sign when he saw the opera Swan Lake on all 4 television channels one morning, such news blackouts having become a sure indication of a political crisis. Well, whatever. Okay. So let's look at another. Here's a book review. Headline says, "The Umpire as Showman." In his own time, there never was a baseball umpire quite like Ron Luciano, period. The debut of the automated ball strike challenge system this season, which allows pitchers, catchers, and batters to appeal strike zone calls, assures that there never will be. Long before the rulers of the sporting world decreed that sports officials should be ghost-like characters seen but not heard, Ron Luciano, baseball umpire extraordinaire, was a part dispenser of justice and part jester of the court of the diamond game. With a tongue that didn't balk and a set of gestures that looked like a first baseman's stretch, this Major League Baseball umpire who strode the base paths and the ground behind home plate like a colossus for 10 years, from 1969 to 79, stood out not only because he stood at 6'4". Wow. His calling card, he added a dose of mirth to the sober ministerings of a profession not known for its sense of humor or rhetorical skills. Umpire Luciano wrote 5 memoirs, to which the one-time journalist Jim Leake now adds a memoir entitled Big Loosh, which is Loosh is spelled Loosh. So the name of the book is The Big Loosh, The Unruly Life of Umpire Ron Luciano, which is a brisk portrait of a showboat umpire who made judgments on the field and often showed poor judgment. He applauded Sal Bando after the Oakland A's third baseman slammed a home run. He antagonized Billy Martin, the New York Yankees manager, often done but not recommended. He hit the, quote, eject, close quote, button with unusual frequency, done in his case with too much joy, and he had a running feud with Earl Weaver, since the two, as an unmoored umpire and a fiery manager, were antagonists in the Double-A Eastern League in the minor leagues. done not wisely, but too well. Luciano sparred with Weaver for decades. In 1975, he bounced the Baltimore Orioles manager from both games of a doubleheader, the second time coming before the game started. Wow. The quarrel became so fiery that Lee MacPhail, the American League president, shifted Luciano off Oriole games. Luciano came to acknowledge that things had gone too far. He admitted that Weaver did not manage as well when I was working the same game. He said many years later, I also did not umpire as well. Luciano had a singular style calling a strike, which was a twisting motion evocative of the football quarterback Lamar Jackson hurling a contorted crossbody pass to a receiver at the sidelines. He specialized in what the author calls, quote, a few extra gestures added to a call, close quote. One was a pistol-shaking motion at first base, familiar in mob films. But for all that clowning around, the author tells us Luciano was dead serious about keeping the game safe. He knew the perils that sports provide as a one-time Syracuse football teammate of Jim Brown and a third-round draft pick of the Detroit Lions. However, injury ended his gridiron dreams and led him into the more genteel fields of baseball, where he became a peacekeeper rather than a mayhem maker. He policed brushback pitches with ardor and once called a night game for darkness when lighting malfunctions compromised visibility near home plate. His fears that a batter, or him behind the plate, would be injured that produced a game that lasted only 5 pitches before the disappointed fans were sent home. Regrets? Luciano had a few, but then again, not too few to escape mention. He practiced what the author calls, quote, the 50-50 defense, close quote. When he was unsure of a call, he had a 50% chance of guessing correctly. This is not what the mandarins of baseball refer to as analytics. One example, a 1975 Tommy Harper line shot towards the left field foul pole. Luciano called it fair and a home run. Everyone else in Baltimore's Memorial Stadium knew otherwise. After further review, as officials would gravely say today, he reversed his call. Luciano brought relief to a profession where stoicism is regarded as next to godliness. He was both revered for the levity he brought to his work and reviled, parentheses, in Major League Baseball Players Association poll in 1974 found that his showmanship may detract from otherwise excellent judgment and attention. However, he was respected sufficiently by his peers to be chosen president of the Major League Umpires Association at a time when umpires were demanding better pay and time off during the season. Luciano was not above joining a picket line. Having gained celebrity for his antics, such as a human impersonating a windmill, and his comments, he said once he preferred short catchers, the better to see over them to judge pitches, Luciano was portrayed by the author here as ideal for television. His subsequent career in the broadcast booth, however, lasted all of 2 seasons. The man for whom the heave-ho had been the way to go experienced an ejection himself. Once a classic American success story, he came from a family of striving Italian immigrants who ran Perry's Grill on North Street in Endicott, New York, near Buffalo. Luciano's life ended in Endicott, the birthplace of IBM, by the way. It came in 1995 with the whisper of a car engine and the deadly carbon monoxide fumes of a brown Cadillac. Maybe that suicide was the result of all those years of grueling travel taking their toll. Maybe it was the loneliness of standing in judgment for so long. Or maybe it was that the clowning that marked the career of Luciano masked a deeper sadness that finally claimed the life of baseball's happy warrior in a size 50, extra long, dark blazer. That article was written by a very famous newspaper journalist by the name of David Schreibman, who formerly executive editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. All right. This is an article entitled "Mostly Paralyzed but Happy to Be Alive." The author is a guy named Dennis Prager. He starts off, I wrote a book called, quote, "Happiness is a Serious Problem," close quote, in 1998, which stressed two important insights. First, happiness isn't to be awaited but must be pursued. Second, expectations are a major impediment to happiness. They undermine the greatest source of happiness, which is gratitude. The more you expect, the less grateful you will be for what you have. The less you expect, the more grateful. In 100 or so talks that I've given on happiness, I've said, quote, "While I have good reason to assume I will be healthy tomorrow, I do not expect to be. I may have a heart attack or discover a cancerous lump, or I may have a stroke or some other life-threatening event or illness. As a result," says Mr. Prager, "I walk around every day with gratitude for my continued health." So I guess we have to savor every day where we are alive and healthy. On November 12, 2024, everything I wrote was put to the test. I had a catastrophic fall at home, which left me paralyzed from the shoulders down. The doctor at the hospital told my wife and son that I should be put on palliative care to make my final days as painless as possible. Truth be told, the fall should have killed me. When the fall occurred, my wife was in our upstairs bedroom adjacent to the bathroom. Usually, she would already be downstairs. However, had she not been there to see me fall and summon help, I would have been dead within minutes as I landed in a position that cut off my breathing. Tested as they were, none of my views on happiness changed. They enabled me to forestall depression. I still believe happiness isn't to be awaited but must be pursued. Low expectations are helpful, especially in a near-fatal fall. And because I have almost no expectations, I am not battling traumatic disappointment. I've experienced considerable pain, both physical and emotional. I've gone from broadcasting a daily radio show and writing a weekly column and flying to deliver at least one lecture a week and taking at least one listener cruise a year to now I'm in a bedridden life. These monumental changes arrived in a split second, and I've replayed the fall in my mind countless times. My condition has reinforced what matters most in my life, namely my wife, children, and grandchildren, my friends, my mind, and my mission to deliver ideas that better people's lives. Why haven't my views on happiness changed? Because I've never believed happiness is solely a function of what happens to us. Catastrophic events will affect us, but even in dire circumstances, we can and should pursue happiness. It would be easy for me to spend my time in mourning, and who would blame me if I did? But my belief that happiness needs to be pursued benefits me and those around me. And while my friends and family sympathize with my situation, they still prefer to be around me when I'm happier. Life's traumas come in many forms: the loss of a child, divorce, drug addiction, illness, financial disaster, and depression. It's human to mourn one situation, but it's our responsibility to fight our way back to a happy life, or at least to make the most of our situation. Life is too precious and too short for self-pity, even under trying circumstances. Whenever I'm tempted to consider the, quote, unfairness, close quote, of my condition, I remind myself of the ways in which I have been unfairly, quote unquote, fortunate all my life. Even at the moment of my fall, I had the good fortune of my wife's presence ensuring that I receive medical attention as soon as possible. It's also remarkable.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print